Paris Academy Music and Drama, National 5 Understanding Music, Unit 2, Music of the Baroque Period. In this unit, we'll explore understanding concepts found in music from the Baroque period. We'll hear examples of each concept and learn what to listen out for to recognise it in an exam paper. To get the most out of this audio guide, you should take notes as you listen. You might find it helpful to group concepts into categories or to create a mind map. The Baroque period began around the year 1600 and lasted until around 1750. Composers like Bach, Handel and Vivaldi were working at the time, composing music that was flowery and fancy. They loved long melodies that noodled up and down all over the place. Baroque is a style concept. Listen out for these fancy melodies. The instruments used in the Baroque period were quite different to the ones we play now. For example, no pianos. Their favourite instrument of all time was the harpsichord. It was the king of the orchestra, but it had its downfalls. Mainly, it couldn't play dynamics. It didn't matter if you pressed very gently or slammed your hand down on the keys. The same little plectrum made the same little sound. That plectrum was also responsible for the harpsichord's other failing, which is that it couldn't sustain. It didn't matter how long you kept your finger down, the sound only lasted for a short time. That aside, those Baroque guys loved their harpsichords. This is a timbre concept. Listen out for the tinny, metallic sound produced by those little plectrums. The organ was another important instrument from the Baroque period, and they're still going strong today. Organs are most at home in churches, but the odd concert hall has one too. The organ has more than one keyboard, known as a manual, and the performer plays bass pedals with both of their feet. The sound of the organ can be altered using controls called stops. Organ is a timbre concept. Listen out for the majestic sound of the instrument and the booming bass pedals. Slightly unusual Baroque instrument we need to know about is the recorder. Yes, the one you played in primary school. Now, let's all take a minute to be thankful that these recorders are not made of plastic. Baroque recorders are wooden, and they came in a variety of different sizes. They played together in groups called consorts. Recorder is a timbre concept. Listen out for the mellow sound produced by this wooden instrument. So, 3 specific Baroque-related instruments that you need to remember and recognise. The ingeniously inferior harpsichord, the church-dwelling organ, and the thankfully wooden recorder. Now the real fun begins, the orchestra. Modern orchestras include huge numbers of instruments from all 4 families: strings, woodwind, brass, and percussion. The Baroque orchestra was a lot smaller than we're used to, and was mainly made up of strings, with a few brass, woodwind, and percussion instruments. Instead of a conductor to wave their arms around, the orchestra was led by the harpsichord. Orchestra is a timbre concept. Listen out for the string-heavy sound of the Baroque orchestra, supported by the harpsichord. Now that we know about some of the instruments used in the Baroque period, let's look at some of the pieces they played. We covered opera in our Making Musical Connections unit. Remember, an opera is a play set to music, accompanied by an orchestra. The story is acted out on stage by performers dressed in elaborate costumes. Remember, the words are often sung in Italian or German. Opera is a style concept. Listen for the classical style of singing and the orchestral accompaniment. Operas are chock full of drama, and the singers share their many feelings with the audience by singing songs known as arias. An aria is a solo song accompanied by an orchestra. Remember, the words are often sung in Italian or German. Aria is a style concept. Listen for the solo voice and the orchestra accompanying them. Arias in the Baroque period used lots of repetition to really hammer home their point. In between arias, soloists used recitative to keep the story moving along. Recitative is a technique where singers will half speak, half sing. To make sure they can be heard, the orchestra stripped back to a few instruments who play simple chords. Remember, the words are often sung in Italian or German. Recitative is a style concept. Listen out for the half speak, half singing style of the performance and the minimal accompaniment.
Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. God with us.
We also need to be able to recognise oratorios. Oratorios are pretty similar to opera in some ways. They still feature soloists who sing arias and recitative. They are still supported by an SATB chorus, and they're still accompanied by an orchestra. But, there's a but, and it's a big but. Operas are secular works, meaning they're not religious. They tell angsty love stories or ridiculous comedies. Oratorios are sacred works, written for the Christian church and retelling Bible stories. Oratorio is a style concept. Listen out for the sacred words sung in English and the orchestra providing the accompaniment. Now a quick reminder of some of our vocal concepts from Making Musical Connections. First, voice types. Female voices are divided into 3 categories: sopranos with high voices, altos with low voices, and mezzo-sopranos with a range somewhere in the middle. Male voices are divided into 4 categories: tenors with high voices, basses with low voices, baritones with a range somewhere in the middle, and countertenors with very high voices. Countertenors were especially popular in the Baroque period. As you listen to this example of a countertenor singing an aria, a solo song from an opera accompanied by an orchestra, see if you can identify the solo instrument. Well done if you recognise the solo instrument there as a trumpet. Remember that you need to be able to recognise all 7 voice types when you hear them. Next, texture. Texture describes how the layers of sound fit together. We learned about 3 different textures in our Making Musical Connections unit: homophonic, polyphonic, and contrapuntal. We're going to listen to examples of homophony and polyphony now. Both were used in the Baroque period. Music with a homophonic texture has one main melody that is supported by harmonies. You will hear many sounds moving at the same time. Homophonic is a texture concept. Listen for the blocks of sound created by many sounds moving at the same time. Music with a polyphonic texture has parts that weave in and out of each other. You will hear many sounds moving at different times. Polyphonic is a texture concept. Listen for the weaving sound created by many sounds moving at different times. If a question asks you to identify the texture of an excerpt, you have 2 options: homophonic, where the parts move together, or polyphonic, where they weave in and out of each other. Listen to this example of a chorus composed by Handel. You will hear sopranos, altos, tenors and basses all singing together, accompanied by an orchestra. But what's the texture? This was an example of a piece with a homophonic texture. Well done if you identified that correctly. We learned about 2 different types of word setting in the Making Musical Connections unit: syllabic and melismatic. Word setting describes how the syllables of a word are matched up to the notes of the melody. If the word setting is syllabic, each syllable of the word is matched up to its very own note. If the word setting is melismatic, a single syllable of the word is given several notes. Melismatic word setting is an important feature of Baroque vocal music. Melismatic is a melody harmony concept. Listen to how a syllable is given many notes. Now let's think a little more about Baroque music written for instruments. Baroque composers loved to use ornaments to decorate their melodies. There are loads of different fancy embellishments, but we need to know about two: the trill and the grace note. Ornaments are used to decorate the melody. Think of them like the china ladies on your granny's mantelpiece. Baroque composers loved them. Trills are ornaments that move between two different notes quickly. Trill is a melody harmony concept. Listen for the wiggling sound created by an instrument moving back and forth between two notes. Our second ornament is the grace note, usually known as an acciaccatura. Grace notes are short notes played before a main note. Grace notes are melody harmony concepts. Listen for the very short notes played before the main melody note. One of the most famous pieces composed in the Baroque period was Pachelbel's Canon in D. Pachelbel's music was popular when he was alive, but nowadays he's famed as the original one-hit wonder, and you will hear this piece played at many a wedding. A canon is a type of polyphonic music. The melody sounds like this. The melody is then copied by other instruments who all start at different times. This is called canon. Canon is a texture, structure, form concept. Listen for the same melody repeated at different times. Now listen to another excerpt from the same piece and listen for the cello playing a ground bass. A bass line that repeats itself over and over and over and over and over while the top parts change. The poor cellist plays the same 8 notes 54 times. Ground bass is a melody harmony concept. Listen for the same bass notes played over and over and over. Right, these are all of the concepts that you need to know for the National 5 Baroque unit. Make sure that you understand the definitions of each concept. Try to describe each one in your own words. Then make sure that you can recognise examples of each of these concepts when you hear them. Good luck!